Hi team, Ms. Vaughn here to read you chapter 10 of Beloved. Okay, content warning. There is sexual assault that happens in this chapter. There is violence. There is the N-word. Um, just as a heads up. Okay, let's get started. All right, so we've been wondering off and on throughout this book, as Paul D has thought to himself several times about Alfred, Georgia. What the heck happened in Alfred, Georgia? Here, we're gonna get an understanding of Alfred, Georgia. Okay, we also know that the book has been moving from past, present, past, present, past, present. Our last past memory that Paul D had was when he got marched off of Sweet Home in the bit and he sees Mr. the Rooster and he feels like the rooster is more free than him. So that's the last past memory that we've seen of Paul D. And this past is going to pick up right here. Okay, so this is all Paul D. All Paul D and all Sweet Home to Alfred, Georgia. And after Alfred, Georgia. Out of sight of Mr. Sight, away, praise his name, from the smiling boss of roosters, Paul D began to tremble. Not all at once, and not so anyone could tell. When he turned his head, aiming for a last look at brother, turned it as much as the rope that connected his neck to the axle of a buckboard allowed, and later on when they fastened the iron around his ankles and clamped the wrist as well. There was no outward sign of trembling at all, nor 18 days after that when he saw the ditches, the 1,000 feet of earth, 5 feet deep, 5 feet wide, into which wooden boxes had been fitted. A door of bars that you could lift on hinges like a cage opened into 3 walls and a roof of scrap lumber and red dirt. 2 feet of it over his head, 3 feet of open trench in front of him, and anything that crawled or scurried welcome to share that grave calling itself quarters. And there were 45 more. He was sent there after trying to kill Brandywine, the man schoolteacher sold him to. Brandywine was leading him in a coffle with 10 others through Kentucky into Virginia. He didn't know exactly what prompted him to try, other than Hallie, 6-0, Paul A, Paul F, and Mister. But the trembling was fixed by the time he knew it was there. Okay, we get some more details. Paul D in the bit, marched off a Sweet Home, gets sold to this man Brandywine. Paul D tries to kill him because he's harboring all of this rage towards what happened to Hallie 6-0, Paul A, Paul F, and also Mister. And then he ends up in Alfred, Georgia. Alfred, Georgia, as it's described here, it's prison. So it's not prison how we think of it as like big cement structures. It is boxes that have been built into the earth. So 3 dirt walls and then a cage door that opens up to close them or lock them inside. And they're all chained together too. Still, no one else knew it because it began inside, a flutter of a kind in the chest, then the shoulder blades. It felt like rippling, gentle at first and then wild. As though the further south they led him, the more his blood, frozen like an ice pond for 20 years, began thawing, breaking into pieces that once melted. Had no choice but to swirl and eddy. Sometimes it was in his leg, then again it moved to the base of his spine. By the time they unhitched him from the wagon and he saw nothing but dogs and 2 shacks and a world of sizzling grass and roiling blood, the roiling blood was shaking him to and fro. But no one could tell. The wrists he held out for the bracelets that evening were steady as were the legs he stood on when the chains were attached to the leg irons. But when they shoved him into the box and dropped the cage door down, his hands quit taking instruction. On their own, they traveled. Nothing could stop them or get their attention. They would not hold his penis to urinate or a spoon to scoop lumps of lima beans into his mouth. The miracle of their obedience came with the hammer at dawn. All 46 men woke to the rifle shot. All 46. 3 white men walked along the trench, unlocking the doors one by one. No one stepped through. When the last lock was opened, the 3 returned and lifted the bars one by one. And one by one the black men emerged, promptly and without the poke of a rifle butt, if they had been there more than a day, promptly with the butt if, like Paul D, they had just arrived. When all 46 were standing in a line in the trench, another rifle shot signaled the climb out and up to the ground above, where 1,000 feet of the best hand-forged chain in Georgia stretched. Each man bent and waited. The first man picked up the end and threaded it through the loop on his leg iron. He stood up then and, shuffling a little, brought the chain tip to the next prisoner, who did likewise. As the chain was passed on and each man stood in the other's place, the line of men turned around, facing the boxes they had come out of. No one spoke to the other, at least not with words. The eyes had to tell what there was to tell. Help me this morning's bad. I'ma make it. New man. Steady now, steady. Chained up completed, they knelt down. The dew, more likely than not, was mist by then. Heavy sometimes, and if the dogs were quiet and just breathing, you could hear doves. Kneeling in the mist, they waited for the whim of a guard or two or three, or maybe all of them wanted it. Wanted it from one prisoner, or particular, or none or all. Breakfast? You want some breakfast? Yes, sir. Hungry? Yes, sir. Here you go. Occasionally, a kneeling man chose gunshot in his head as the price maybe of taking a bit of foreskin with him to Jesus. Paul D did not know that then. He was looking at his palsied hands, smelling the guard, listening to his soft grunts, so like the doves, as he stood before the man kneeling in mist on his right. Convinced he was next, Paul D retched, vomiting up nothing at all. An observing guard smashed his shoulder with the rifle, and the engaged one decided to skip the new man for the time being, lest his pants and shoes got soiled by puke. Okay, Paul D's first day there. He's realizing that all of these men have to do everything in a very uniform way, or else they're not going to be able to survive together. They kneel down after they get out of their cage in the morning. They chain themselves together, and then they go through this. When I said at the beginning of the video, content warning, there's sexual assault that happens. This is the sexual assault that I was talking about. So the guards of the prison would force the men to give them oral sex in the morning. And on Paul D's first day, he witnesses it, and it makes him so sick that he throws up. Okay. Hi. It was the first sound other than, yes, sir. A black man was allowed to speak each morning, and the lead chain gave it everything he had. Hi. It was never clear to Paul D how he knew when to shout that mercy. They called him Hi Man, and Paul D thought at first the guards told him when to give the signal that let the prisoners rise up off their knees and dance two-step to the music of hand-forged iron. Later, he doubted it. He believed to this day that the hi at dawn and the ho when evening came were the responsibility High Man assumed because he alone knew what was enough, what was too much, when things were over, when the time had come. The chain danced over the fields through the woods to a trail that ended in astonishing beauty of feldspar. And there, Paul D's hands disobeyed the furious rippling of his blood and paid attention. With the sledgehammer in his hands and High Man's lead, the men got through. They sang it out and beat it up, garbling the words so they could not be understood, tricking the words so their syllables yielded up other meanings. They sang the women they knew, the children they had been, the animals they had tamed themselves or seen others tame. They sang bosses and masters and misses, old mules and dogs, and the shamelessness of life. They sang lovingly of graveyards and sisters long gone, of pork in the woods, meal in the pan, fish on the line, cane, rain, and rocking chairs. Okay, so remember the podcast episode that we listened to about music, and the way that spirituals were used? This is Toni Morrison writing about that here. So if you want to put a little note in your book thinking about the way that history is used, or also if we're thinking about our paper two prompts, the way something like defiance can be used too, and that they would change the words and how they were pronounced or said, that would go along with the changed meanings too. And they would sing these songs to kind of process their emotions, also to process their memories, to tell each other about the memories that they have. And a coping mechanism too, right? It would distract their brain a little bit as they were doing this really hard, intensive physical labor to be able to sing together. And they beat the women for having known them and no more, no more. The children for having been them, but never again. They killed a boss so often and so completely they had to bring him back to life to pulp him one more time. Tasting hot meal cake among pine trees, they beat it away. Singing love songs to Mr. Death, they smashed his head. More than the rest, they killed the flirt whom folks called life for leading them on, making them think the next sunrise would be worth it. that another stroke of time would do it at last. Only when she was dead would they be safe. The successful ones, the ones who had been there enough years to have maimed, mutilated, maybe even buried her, kept watch over the others who were still in her cock-teasing hug, caring and looking forward, remembering and looking back. They were the ones whose eyes said, "Help me, it's bad," or "Look out," meaning this might be the day I bay, or eat my own mess, or run. And it was this last that had to be guarded against. For if one pitched and ran, all 46 would be yanked by the chain that bound them, and no telling who or how many would be killed. A man could risk his own life, but not his brother's. So the eye said, "Steady now, and hang by me." Okay, we've talked about this so often, but the idea of being physically imprisoned, can your mind be free too? And the prisoners in this prison camp, Paul D included, have learned that to have a free mind and to think about the past and what was or what could be, could drive someone crazy. And so the best coping mechanism is to just accept a certain type of emotional numbness that goes along with it. Um, and that's why that goes along with when we talked about Paul D's tobacco tin heart. That's it's from this coping mechanism that he developed that. All right. Top of 129, 86 days and done. Life was dead. Paul beat her butt all day, every day, till there was not a whimper in her. 86 days and his hands were still, waiting serenely each rat-rustling night for high at dawn and the eager clench on the hammer shaft. Life rolled over dead, or so he thought. It rained. Snakes came down from short leaf pine and hemlock. It rained. Cypress, yellow poplar, ash, and palmetto drooped under 5 days of rain without wind. By the 8th day, the doves were nowhere in sight. By the 9th, even the salamanders were gone. Dogs laid their ears down and stared over their paws. The men could not work. Chain up was slow, breakfast abandoned. This two-step became a slow drag over soupy grass and unreliable earth. It was decided to lock everybody down in the boxes till it either stopped or lightened up so a white man could walk, damn it, without flooding his gun and the dogs could quit shivering. Okay, so again, Paul D and the chickens, now Paul D and these dogs, that it's not just dehumanization, it's being treated even lower than an animal. Because Mr. was too free, and then here the dogs are more free than the prisoners are too, or they're taken better care of. The chain was threaded through 46 loops of the best hand-forged iron in Georgia. It rained. In the boxes, the men heard the water rise in the trench and looked out for cottonmouths. They squatted in muddy water, slept above it, peed in it. Paul D thought he was screaming. His mouth was open and there was this loud throat-splitting sound, but it might have been somebody else. Then he thought he was crying. Something was running down his cheeks. He lifted his hands to wipe away the tears and saw dark brown slime. Above him, rivulets of mud slid through the boards of the roof. When it come down, he thought, "Gonna crush me like a tick bug." It happened so quick he had no time to ponder. Somebody yanked the chain once hard enough to cross his legs and throw him into the mud. He never figured out how he knew, how anybody did, but he did know. He did, and he took both hands and yanked the length of the chain at his left so the next man would know too. Okay, they're all locked underneath ground in their prison cells, which is like a trench that's been built into the ground. And so it's raining. It's been raining for 9 days. All that water is going to loosen the mud. And so there's this moment where the mud is either going to cave in on them and it's going to suffocate them and kill them, or the mud is going to be pliable enough for them to be able to break free and get away. And that's what's happening right now. The water was above his ankles, flowing over the wooden plank he slept on. And then it wasn't water anymore. The ditch was caving in and mud oozed under and through the bars. They waited, each and every one of the 46, not screaming, although some of them must have fought like the devil not to. The mud was up to his thighs and he held onto the bars. Then it came, another yank from the left this time, and less forceful than the first because of the mud it passed through. It started like the chain up, but the difference was the power of the chain. One by one, from high man back on down the line, they dove, down through the mud under the bars, blind, groping. Some had sense enough to wrap their heads in their shirts, cover their faces with rags, put on their shoes. Others just plunged, simply ducked down and pushed out, fighting up, reaching for air. Some lost direction, and their neighbors, feeling confused, The confused pull of the chain snatched them around. For one lost, all lost. The chain that held them would save all or none. The high man was the delivery. They talked through that chain like Sam Morse, and great God, they all came up. Like the unshriven dead, zombies on the loose, holding the chains in their hands, they trusted the rain and the dark, yes, but mostly High Man and each other. Past the sheds where the dogs lay in deep depression, past the two-guard shacks, past the stable of sleeping horses, past the hens whose bills were bolted into their feathers, they waited. The moon did not help because it wasn't there. The field was a marsh, the track a trough. All Georgia seemed to be sliding, melting away. Moss wiped their faces as they fought the live oak branches that blocked their way. Georgia took up all of Alabama and Mississippi, so there was no state line to cross, and it wouldn't have mattered anyway. If they had known about it, they would have avoided not only Alfred and the beautiful Feldspar, but Savannah too, and headed for the Sea Islands or the river that slid down from the Blue Ridge Mountains. But they didn't know. Okay, you have to remember that the land is not just the land surrounding their prison that they're in, but the whole land has been washed out. So think like mudslide. 46 men chained together. They have to navigate through the forest and try to get free as they're trudging through the mud. Daylight came and they huddled in a copse of redbud trees. Night came and they scrambled up to higher ground, praying the rain would go on shielding them and keeping folks at home. They were hoping for a shack, solitary, some distance from its big house, where a slave might be making rope or heating potatoes at the grate. What they found was a camp of sick Cherokee for whom a rose was named. Decimated but stubborn, they were among those who chose a fugitive life rather than Oklahoma. Okay, so Toni Morrison, again, literary genius. She is building this historical fiction to fact. And the men who are in Georgia, they come across a group of Cherokee men who are a group of sick Cherokee who decided to not partake in the Trail of Tears to take them from their land to Oklahoma. But they're sick, and like we know this, that they got sick from colonialism, as we talked about when we read the Applicant earlier in the year. Very similar situation. Okay, the illness that swept them now was reminiscent of the one that had killed half their number 200 years earlier. In between that calamity and this, they had visited George III in London, published a newspaper, made baskets, led Oglethorpe through forest, helped Andrew Jackson fight Creek, cooked maize, drawn up a constitution, petitioned the King of Spain. They're experimented on by Dartmouth, established asylums, wrote their language, resisted settlers, shot bear, and translated scripture, all to no avail. The forced move to the Arkansas River, insisted upon by the same president they fought for against the Creek, destroyed another quarter of their already shattered number. Okay, these Native American people, the Cherokee, they tried to be cooperative in so many different ways, thinking that once they were able to do something for the white people, that then they would have their freedom or their autonomy. But like Baby Suggs told us in the chapter before, they never know when to stop. And so the Cherokee people keep trying to do things to show their worth, that they deserve their freedom, or show that they're smart and they're worthy of being seen as the equivalents to the people who colonized them. But as she describes here at the end, that they slowly get destroyed. Okay, that was it, they thought, and removed themselves from those Cherokee who signed the treaty in order to retire into the forest and await the end of the world. The disease they suffered now was a mere inconvenience compared to the devastation they remembered. Still, they protected each other as best they could. The healthy were sent some miles away, the sick stayed behind with the dead to survive or join them. The prisoners from Alfred, Georgia, sat down in semicircle near the encampment. No one came, and still they sat. Hours passed, and the rain turned soft. Finally, a woman stuck her head out of her house. Night came, and nothing happened. At dawn, two men with barnacles covering their beautiful skin approached them. No one spoke for a moment. Then High Man raised his hand. The Cherokee saw the chains and went away. When they returned, each carried a handful of small axes. Two children followed with a pot of mush, cooling and thinning in the rain. Okay, so the men who are all chained together, they get freed by these Cherokee and fed. Buffalo men, they called them, and talked slowly to the prisoners, scooping mush and tapping away at their chains. Nobody from a box in Alfred, Georgia, cared about the illness the Cherokee warned them about, so they stayed, all 46 resting, planning their next move. Paul D had no idea of what to do and knew less than anybody, it seemed. He heard his co-convicts talking knowledgeably of rivers and states, towns and territories, heard Cherokee men describe the beginning of the world and its end, listened to tales of other buffalo men they knew, 3 of whom were in the healthy camp a few miles away. High Man wanted to join them, others wanted to join him. Some wanted to leave, some to stay on. Weeks later, Paul D was the only buffalo man left without a plan. All he could think of was tracking dogs. Although High Man said the rain they left in gave that no chance of success. Alone, the last man with buffalo hair among the alien Cherokee, Paul D finally woke up and, admitting his ignorance, asked how he might get north. Free north, magical north, welcoming, benevolent north. The Cherokee smiled and looked around. The flood rains of a month ago had turned everything to steam and blossoms. That way, he said, pointing. Follow the tree flowers, he said. Only the tree flowers. As they go, you go. You will be where they want to be when they are gone. You will be where you want to be when they are gone. So he raced from dogwood to blossoming peach. When they thinned out, he headed for cherry blossoms, then magnolia, chinaberry, pecan, walnut, and prickly pear. At last he reached a field of apple trees whose flowers were just as becoming tiny nuts of fruit. Spring sauntered north, but he had to run like hell to keep it as his traveling companion. From February to July, he was on the lookout for blossoms. When he lost them, he found himself without so much as a petal to guide him. He paused, climbed a tree on a hillock, and scanned the horizon for a flash of pink or white in the leaf world that surrounded him. He did not touch them or stop to smell. He merely followed in their wake, a dark, ragged figure guided by the blossoming plums. The apple field turned out to be Delaware, where the Weaver lady lived. She snapped him up as soon as he finished the sausage she fed him and crawled into her bed crying. She passed him off as her nephew from Syracuse simply by calling him that nephew's name. 18 months and he was looking out again for blossoms, only this time he did the looking on a dray. It was some time before he could put Alfred Georgia, Sixo, schoolteacher, Hallie, his brothers, Setha, Mr., the taste of iron, the sight of butter, the smell of hickory, notebook paper, one by one into the tobacco tin lodged in his chest. By the time he got to 124, nothing in this world could pry it open. Okay, so we get the lapse in time from when Paul D escapes Sweet Home, tries to kill Brandywine, is in Alfred, Georgia, escapes and lives with the Cherokee for a little bit, follows the fruit trees or the flowering trees all the way north to Delaware, lives with a woman for 18 months. And all that time, he's processing all of his emotions because Paul D's got a lot going on. You guys, he's got no family. He doesn't know where to go. His best coping mechanism has been to numb himself. And so now that he has freedom, how is he going to, or would it even be worthy for him to no longer be numb? And so that numbness is symbolized by the tobacco tin that has replaced his heart. And he's taken all of his worst memories, and they're the worst memories because they are of some of them, or of the best people that he knows, and he's locked them all in this tobacco tin and he's holding it in his heart. Okay, you gotta hold on to that because this is the second time the tobacco tin has been mentioned. So we know it's important, right? And as I said earlier in this video, or in the last video, I can't even remember now, Toni Morrison gives us these little bits of information and then she brings it all together in the end. Okay, thank you.